There was a photograph sent to me 8 months after the case closed. A woman standing on a dock in the early morning wearing an orange life vest, holding a cup of coffee, waving at someone she did not know was taking the picture. She was smiling the way people smile when they are not thinking about smiling. The person who sent it wrote 2 words beneath it: she volunteers. That image is why I am still talking about this case. Let me go back to the beginning. Her name was Renata Voss. She was 43 years old, and she had been out on the water for 11 hours when her vessel began taking on water 5 nautical miles off the coast of Santa Barbara, California, on the afternoon of September 14, 2022. The distress call came in at 4:47 p.m. The Coast Guard response team was 8 minutes away. 8 minutes. That is the distance between a life saved and a life lost on open water. What happened inside those 8 minutes is why I am here. I want to ask you something before I go further. Have you ever watched someone make a choice that did not cost them anything to make correctly, and they still made it wrong? Subscribe to this channel, because that question is the center of everything that follows, and I want you here for all of it. I will tell you about Harrison Doyle shortly, but Renata is first because she has always been first in this story, and she deserves to be named that way. When she walked into my courtroom on March 6, 2023, she walked deliberately, not slowly because she was weak, deliberately because she had decided that every step was going to be intentional. She sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the window. There was not much to see through it. She looked at it anyway. During the 3 hours she sat in that room, she did one thing I have not forgotten. Every time the defense asked her something she found unfair, she paused. She waited until she was ready. Then she answered clearly. She did not raise her voice once. I have sat across from many people who were wronged. Renata Voss carried her wrong with a quiet that I do not have a clean word for. Both rivers were already running by the time she sat down. Harrison Doyle was 61 years old. He had owned a 47-foot yacht since 2018, built a logistics company in the San Joaquin Valley that employed around 80 people, gave money to his church. At the preliminary hearing, his employees described him as fair. When he walked into my courtroom, he walked the way men walk when they are accustomed to being the largest presence in any room. He sat down heavily. He adjusted his tie 3 times in the first 5 minutes. And then, somewhere in the second hour of testimony, the prosecutor read aloud the name of Renata's daughter, a 9-year-old girl who had been waiting on the dock. Harrison Doyle closed his eyes. He did not open them for nearly a full minute. I watched him the entire time. That moment had nothing to do with his legal position. It had everything to do with who he was underneath the charges. It required something of me to hold his full humanity at exactly the same moment I was holding the full weight of what he had done. That is not a comfortable place to stand. I stood there anyway. Here is what happened on September 14, 2022. The sea off Santa Barbara was running 3 to 4 foot swells, winds from the northwest at 12 knots. Renata Voss was alone on a 22-foot sailboat called the Marguerite. She had been sailing since she was 17. At 4:39 p.m., a seal strike cracked her hull below the waterline. The Marguerite began flooding faster than the bilge pump could manage. She triggered her EPIRB, her emergency position indicating radio beacon, immediately. The signal reached the Coast Guard sector in Los Angeles. A rescue boat was dispatched from the Santa Barbara station. The route that boat needed to take ran directly alongside a cove where Harrison Doyle had anchored his yacht for the afternoon. When the rescue vessel entered the narrow passage adjacent to that cove, Doyle's 47-foot yacht was positioned at an angle that blocked approximately 60% of the navigable channel. The rescue boat was forced to reduce speed and navigate around his stern. That maneuver cost 4 minutes and 17 seconds. They arrived on scene at 4:58 p.m. Renata Voss was in the water. She had been in the water for 6 minutes. The water temperature was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. She was rescued. But she had swallowed water. Her left arm was injured from holding the hull of the Marguerite as it went under, and she had been alone in 58-degree swells for 6 minutes, waiting for someone to come. When the Coast Guard contacted Doyle by radio and asked him to move, the transcript entered into evidence shows the following exchange. The officer said, "Sir, we have a maritime emergency in the adjacent passage. We need you to reposition your vessel immediately." Harrison Doyle said, "I have guests on board and we are anchored for the day. You have the whole ocean out there." He said that. That sentence is its own river. The sorrow current begins right there at that sentence, on that radio frequency at 4:41 in the afternoon. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was running in the background around you has probably gotten a little farther away. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story. The case came across my desk on January 18, 2023. The charges were obstruction of a Coast Guard operation and interference with maritime law enforcement, federal violations under Title 14 of the United States Code, Section 89, which prohibits interference with any Coast Guard operation and gives the Coast Guard broad authority over maritime law enforcement. Most people have never heard of that statute. It exists because the ocean is a place where seconds are not abstract. 4 minutes and 17 seconds on open water in September off the coast of California is not a rounding error. It is the space between a little girl watching her mother walk off a boat and the alternative. When I opened that file and read the timeline for the first time, I felt two things at once: the cold weight of those 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and something quieter, something that ran alongside it, the question of whether a man who had said what he said on that radio could still be brought to understand what it cost. I felt both of those things at the same time. I had not felt them in exactly that combination before. The morning of the first hearing, I watched Renata enter the courtroom from the bench. From the bench, you see what the gallery cannot see. You see where people's eyes go the moment they cross the threshold. Renata looked at the room the way you look at a place you spent time preparing to enter. She had prepared. That told me something. She was not here for the emotion. She was here because she had decided that being here was what the situation required, and she was going to meet that requirement completely. The grace current was already in Renata Voss before she sat down. It did not cancel the sorrow. It ran alongside it at equal depth. When Doyle entered that same courtroom, what I could see from the bench that cannot be seen from anywhere else is the half second before a person puts on what they are going to be in a room. In that half second before he adjusted his posture and walked toward the defense table, he looked like a man about to do something he did not want to do, but understood he had to do. That was not performance. That was recognition. I noted it. Here is what I am offering you, the rest of this story, told the same way I have been telling it. Nothing made smaller than it actually was. Nothing resolved before it earned its resolution. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. The evidence in this case is where the two rivers became most visible in their separation and then in their slow movement toward each other. The sorrow current reached its fullest expression in the Coast Guard body camera footage. I watched it twice in chambers before the hearing and once more during proceedings. What it shows is the rescue team performing the maneuver around Doyle's vessel at reduced speed, the officer at the helm saying quietly, not for the record, just to the person beside him, "Come on, come on." Then open water. Then the moment they spotted Renata, she was face up, conscious, but her arm was moving wrong and her lips were the color of a sky before weather. That footage belonged entirely to the sorrow current. I did not try to frame it differently. I watched it. I let it be what it was. The grace current had its first expression in a letter submitted by the defense, written by a man named Marcus Webb, who had worked in the loading dock at Doyle's logistics company for 11 years. The letter said in part, "He never once treated me like I was less than him. When my mother was sick, he let me take time I had not earned yet, and he never mentioned it again. I am not telling you this to balance a ledger. I am telling you because it belongs to the grace current, and that current has to be traced honestly, or it is not a river. It is just a convenience." Marcus Webb wrote that letter without being asked. It arrived in the evidence because it existed. I noted which current it belonged to. I kept both currents moving. The moment both rivers were present in a single piece of evidence came through the testimony of Rescue Team Commander Lieutenant David Castrito, 14 years on the water. He testified about the maneuver. He testified about the 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Then the prosecutor asked him, in your experience, when a civilian vessel fails to yield in a maritime emergency, how often is it intentional? He paused. Then he said, most of the time it is not intentional. People do not know what an EPIRB response looks like from the outside. They do not know that a rescue vessel running at speed near them is a rescue vessel. Then he said, this time the radio log shows he was contacted directly and told, that is the part I keep coming back to. I wrote that down. I looked at what I had written. Both rivers were in that sentence. The full weight of what was done and the honest acknowledgement that this case was not in the accidental part of the spectrum. That was the convergence point. Everything from that moment in the proceedings moved toward sentencing from the place where both rivers ran together. Someone in the gallery reacted to Castrillo's testimony without making a sound. A woman 3 rows back put her hand flat on the wooden bench in front of her and pressed it there. That was all. It came from the confluence place. Not pure grief, not pure relief, but the specific impulse of someone absorbing a truth that was carrying both things at once. I just realized, saying that out loud, that I have never described that woman to anyone before. Subscribe now, because the part of this case I have described least is still coming, and I want you present for it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The defense argued that Doyle had not understood the urgency of the radio call, that the passage was a shared maritime corridor, and that his vessel was legally anchored within permissible limits. Both technically true. The defense presented it without theater. But then Patrick Sorrell, the defense attorney, said something in closing that I did not expect. He said, my client was not a man who wanted to block anything. He was a man who did not look up. He meant it as mitigation. I received it as something closer to the truth than he intended. A man who did not look up. That sentence belongs to the grace current, not because it excuses, but because it names something honest about how harm most often happens, not with malice at the center, with the choice to not look up, but inattention that costs 4 minutes and 17 seconds in 58-degree water does not stop being harm because the source was inattention. The sorrow current does not pause for the motivation of the person who created the conditions. Renata Voss was in the water regardless. Doyle testified in his own defense. He was measured. He did not deflect. And then there was one moment, the prosecutor asked him, when the Coast Guard officer told you there was a maritime emergency, what did you think that meant? Doyle looked at his hands. Then he looked up. Then he said, I think I thought it meant something was happening somewhere else. I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. The full weight of the harm, because something was happening somewhere else, and it was Renata Voss in the water, and also something recognizable. The way people locate emergencies at a safe distance from themselves. The way we assume the alarm is for someone else's house. He said it. I wrote it down. I did not expect that sentence to carry both rivers. It did. I want to place something next to this case without explaining why it belongs there. When I was 31, my brother took a job in another state and called me the night before he left. We talked for almost an hour. At one point, he said, I should have done this years ago. I felt 2 things simultaneously, something like loss and something like pride. And those 2 things were so equal in weight that I did not know which direction to face. He is fine. He has been fine for decades. But I have never lost the memory of standing inside those 2 equal weights and not knowing what to do with my hands. This case lived in that same structure. The loss was real. The possibility was real. They did not take turns. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect. Because what I just said about my brother, about not knowing what to do with my hands, I have not said that out loud in any professional context before today. Subscribe while I take a breath with that. Subscribe and stay. Okay, let me keep going. The room before sentencing was the kind of room that has made up its mind to be still. Doyle's hands were folded on the table in front of him, the same position Renata had held in the witness chair. And I noticed that because it was not staged, it was just where both of them had landed. She was in the third row looking at me, not at him, at me. I had spent 2 weeks arriving at this ruling. I had decided knowing it had to hold the weight of what was lost and also leave room for what might still come. Those two things do not always fit in the same sentence. In this case, I had made sure they did. The verdict was guilty on both counts. Doyle received it without visible reaction. Renata closed her eyes. Not the way Doyle had closed them during testimony. She closed them the way someone closes their eyes when something they have been waiting for has finally arrived and they want to be completely inside the moment of its arrival. Then I spoke. I am going to speak it again now. I am ordering you to pay $230,000 to the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary Foundation, which funds the training and equipment of volunteer rescue personnel. This amount reflects the documented cost of the operation your inattention delayed, multiplied by the calculable value of the response time you removed. I want that money to make the next rescue 4 minutes and 17 seconds faster. That is what it is for. I am also ordering 300 hours of community service to be completed with the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary on active water patrol, not administrative, on the water, over 18 months, under the direct supervision of Commander Castillo's station. You will learn what an EPIRB response looks like from the outside. You will show up. You will be useful. You will look up. And there is one more thing. You are required to write a letter to Renata Voss, not an apology. I am not ordering an apology because an ordered apology is meaningless. The letter will contain one thing, an account, in your own words, of what you now understand happened on September 14th, 2022. What Renata experienced that afternoon. What 6 minutes alone in 58-degree water means. That letter will be submitted to this court within 90 days. It will be read by me. It will be sealed. It will not be used against you, but it will be written, because writing it will require you to look up in a way that nothing else I can order will. If you complete your service hours with a satisfactory performance review from Commander Castillo's office before the 18-month mark, I will consider early completion of the community service requirement. That is my way of saying, without saying it as a sentence, because a sentence is not the right vessel for a belief, that I think you are capable of something better than the choice you made that afternoon. Then I spoke directly to him and to the room. I said, what you did cost a woman 4 minutes and 17 seconds of the worst kind of alone. She was in 58-degree water, holding her injured arm, watching her boat go under, waiting. The Coast Guard reached her because they are trained for exactly the conditions your choice created, and because Renata Voss is a person who held on. What she lost in that water and what she carried out of it belongs to her, and I am not going to name it for this room. To Renata, I said, you held on, in the water and in this courtroom. That is the truest thing I can say about who you are, and it is not a small truth. To Doyle, I said, I do not believe you are the choice you made that afternoon. I believe you are capable of becoming someone who knows what it costs to not look up. I am ordering you to find that out. To the room, I said, we are here because someone called for help and someone else without malice, without intent, made it harder to answer. That happens in smaller ways every day. The law addresses the large versions. The smaller ones are what we owe each other. And then one last thing, to no one in particular, a fact. The ocean does not know whose name is on the boat. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. Hold that last sentence. Subscribe before we go further. Because what happened after I said it is the part of this case I have thought about the most. Subscribe now. When the courtroom began to empty, I did not stand immediately. From the bench, you see the room differently when it is leaving than when it is full. I watched Renata stand, pick up her bag, say something to the woman beside her. The woman put her hand on Renata's arm for a moment. Then they walked out together. Before I stood up, I looked at the legal pad in front of me. I had written 2 things during the proceedings that I entered into no formal record. Doyle's sentence about thinking the emergency was happening somewhere else, and Castillo's sentence about what he kept coming back to. I folded the top of that page down so the writing was covered. Then I stood up. 8 months later, September 14, 2023, exactly 1 year from the date of Renata's distress call, the photograph arrived, sent by her attorney. 2 words beneath it: she volunteers. She had joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary. She was on the water as a volunteer. The orange life vest, the coffee. The smile she did not know was being recorded. The sorrow of what that vest had cost her to put on was present in my knowing her story. The grace of what she had chosen to do with that cost was equally present. I held both. I did not choose between them. The defense filed an appeal on the penalty structure in May 2023. The Ninth Circuit heard it in October and affirmed the ruling in full in February 2024. 9 months. When my clerk handed me the notification, I read it at my desk, set it down, looked at the window for a moment, and went back to the file I had been working on. That is my honest response, not relief performed for the record. A thing that needed settling had been settled, both rivers still running, both rivers still mine to carry. What this case showed me, what I am still working out, is that holding two things at once is not a skill, it is a decision. Every moment in that courtroom I could have let one river overtake the other. I chose not to, not because I am disciplined, but because the case would not let me. Doyle closing his eyes when he heard the name of Renata's daughter, Renata waiting until she was ready before she answered. Both things were happening simultaneously, and they were equally real, and a ruling that did not hold both of them would have been a lesser truth than the room actually contained. I have never said that in any other professional context. This case produced it in me. If you are carrying the sorrow current of this story, if you recognize what Renata felt in that water, if someone's inattention has ever put you somewhere you should not have had to be, I am not going to tell you it resolves cleanly. What I watched happen to Renata over 3 hours in that courtroom is this. The sorrow did not leave her face, but she became more fully herself with every answer she gave, not despite what happened to her, because she was meeting it with the whole of who she was. I watched that from the bench. Both things were true at once, and neither canceled the other. If you recognize yourself in Doyle's position, if you have made a choice that caused real harm and you are carrying what comes next, I am not going to lecture you. The people I have watched move towards something after sitting in that chair did one specific thing differently from those who did not. They stopped explaining and started describing. They stopped building a defense inside their own minds and actually looked at what happened. That is the whole difference. Just that. The ruling is not the end of who you are. I have never believed that, not once, not from this bench. Subscribe. That is all. That photograph. A woman in an orange life vest on a dock in the early morning, holding coffee, waving at someone she did not know was watching. That is why I told you this story. If something in it is sitting with you, if you found yourself in one river or in both at the same time, the comments are where people who are willing to feel two things at once tend to find each other. I have found that to be true every time I have spoken about this case.